1 Corinthians 2, 6-16. Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away. But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we've received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given us by God. And we impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he's not able to understand them, because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ.
Although I'm always a bit scared standing up here, when I see your faces, it does fill me with joy. So, thank you and bless you. What an evening, and thank you for those people who've shared their testimony. And you know, God is working, isn't He? God is an amazing God, and that's really touched me. Good. Well. Some of us are kind of one-trick ponies. Some of us are a jack of all trades, master of none. I wonder which one you are, and what is your specialist subject? You know, we all think differently, don't we? Everyone has something that's their little skill, and we had a funny evening the other night when we had a prayer evening for Mary, and a dear sister in the church was telling us about the time when her specialist subject suddenly shone out. This was a quiz night, which she hated quiz nights. And let's just say her general knowledge is something that sometimes she gets her leg pulled for. But her chance to shine came in this particular quiz. A round cropped up where everyone had to guess all these obscure bones. Pete will probably be all right at this. And then they had to place them in the body. Well, she didn't have to guess. She knew every single one. Being a radiographer, she smashed that round out of the park, and everyone was gobsmacked. And I've put a selection of some experts up here. You know, we love experts, don't we? There's some here. I expect you probably know all of them, bar one, if you're like me, or if you're probably younger, you might know all of them. My uncle loves this guy in the top left, Brian Cox, Professor Brian Cox. And my uncle's quite a brain box, and he enjoys listening to all of his things on space and planets and everything. I think he probably wants to be like him. Then, you know, who can't love Monty Don, apart from being jealous at his huge garden? And, you know, wouldn't you love to plant vegetables or pick vegetables like him? I'm no good with numbers, so I'd like to be a bit more like Carol Vorderman in that department. My lovely wife bakes a mean loaf, but when you see Paul Hollywood and he's kind of squeezing the bread and then dissecting everything that they should have done, you just like, wow, he knows bread. And of course, there are people now making money from being influencers. And this was the one I didn't know of, but apparently, does anyone know who this is? Oh, yes, Mrs. Hinch, this is. And she is one of the best-known influencers in the UK, and she is making lots of money through solving all of your household woes with her handy cleaning hacks. So if that's your thing, then there you are. Now, these people, they might have learned all the skills and have people looking up to them, but no amount of learning, experience, success, wealth, book deals, or fame is going to help them, or us for that matter, with some of the bigger issues in life. And haven't we just been hearing some of the bigger issues this evening? No amount of head knowledge will stop them from falling ill. Their wisdom won't help them with problem relationships. It won't help them when they get bad news. And it won't help them with the biggest problem that all of us have, in that one day our hearts will stop beating and we'll breathe for the last time. And I'd probably say that in 100 years from now, if you ask the same question, who are these famous people, probably no one could tell you. They'd all be forgotten. No one would want to be like them. They'd all be long gone. So this is a problem, isn't it? I think deep down we all know this, but the world does everything it can to deny and pretend. Why are we so concerned with what's here today and gone tomorrow? Now, my lovely old gran, she was one of the cleverest people I knew. She could speak multiple languages. She could hold in-depth conversations with many people on anything. She was interesting, she was fun, she was engaging. But when I went to see her in a nursing home in her mid-90s, she was with dozens of other people in the same boat in rural Wales. And what suddenly struck me was that for her, she was just the same as the old lady next door to her, who didn't have any of the learning, and she had been born, raised, and spent all of her life in this one valley. And my gran, who'd had such an amazing life, and this woman who'd been in the valleys, they both seemed the same, as all her qualifications were unimportant, as she struggled to do the very basic things in her day. You see, at some point in our lives, we'll all ask the bigger questions, the what's it all about questions. And at the start of this century, the West was confident that it had everything sussed out. Everything was just going to get better. Humans were in charge. Just relax, enjoy the playgrounds of all the things that the world offers. And the trouble is, after financial turmoil, fire, pestilence, and war, people aren't so sure about this Western dream, are they? For a few decades now, we all thought we were going to live a life better than our parents, but now the situation's looking quite grim. So what is it all about? And I think the world knows that things are looking bleak, so its answer is to kind of, make the most of every moment, and then there's light entertainment for every other moment. Anything to distract us from these big questions. There's every conceivable distraction at our fingertips, in our pockets. There are addictions that harm people in our brains, like pornography, like drugs, other vices. There are things like video games that seem harmless at first, but are actually designed to draw us in and have an effect on our brains the same as hard drugs, whilst normalizing violence. There's a rabbit hole for every conceivable interest. Don't think yourself smug if you're not into video games. Have you got a simple, wholesome interest? Well, the internet has got a rabbit hole just for you, so that every single person can spend many hours down in the darkness. No one's exempt. However lofty you think your own interest is, you're still just as susceptible being in the dark, glued to a screen for thousands of hours. So, what's all this got to do with the Corinthians? Well, the Corinthians were a people group that Paul was writing to. They were a group of Christians in the ancient city of Corinth, which is modern-day Greece. It was a port city, and there was every type of person and every type of vice from all over the Roman Empire. This is a little snapshot of what it looked like. There are ruins today that you can go and look around. And They had every single comfort, vice, and distraction available to every type of individual, and it was a real melting pot of different ideas and cultures. The Romans were the big empire guys. They were in charge and controlled everything. They were keen on light entertainment for the masses. That way, you see, they'd be less likely to rebel. The area was all Greek in language and culture, so even though the Greek Empire of Alexander was long gone, the ruling Romans embraced loads of Greek influence. They liked figuring things out, the Greeks. They put a high value on knowledge. They celebrated the finer things in life. And they loved listening to celebrity experts. The Romans and the Greeks loved a whole host of different gods and many different temples. These beliefs and temple worship were so caught up in everyday life that everyone was involved. There was also some Jews in the mix, a population that was pretty much tolerated by the Romans and actually had quite a lot of influence. So the Jews had their own particular quarter, traditions, and synagogues. So, when Paul planted this church in Corinth, it was made up of people from all these different backgrounds. There was the Romans, the Greeks, and the Jews. There were rich and poor, slave and free. There were people who'd been really changed by God. There were people who was a bit changed, and some who just thought that Jesus was another kind of bolt-on to add to all of their other beliefs. If the people in Corinth were asked about wisdom, they would answer with some of these things. These were the things that were important to each of the three big cultures in that city. Now, when we look at these values, which of them resonate with us today? What sort of things on this list do you think are virtues that you'd like? You see, for some of us, we might be trying to be the next Paul Hollywood and posting all our pictures of our perfect sourdough bakes. Some of us will be watching Mrs. Hinch on TikTok. We're reading up on how to grow the best tomatoes, and we might listen to a podcast, watch a video, and accumulate all this knowledge in our heads. And the thing is that we can be very similar when it comes to our faith. We can aim to be like somebody who impresses us. We can get the next Christian life hack. We can listen to podcasts, watch videos, and read books on how to grow. We can even do the things that we think we should do. But you see, Paul is explaining a different way in this passage. He's highlighting that knowledge is not the same as knowing. Paul is catching all of us in this net. We're all impressed by things. He doesn't care if you think like a Roman, a Greek, or a Jew. No matter what you think is clever, all of this stuff is the world's wisdom. The people in ancient Greece had been obsessed with clever thought about God for centuries, but most of them had never discovered him. The Jews had all the scriptures describing God in their very possession. But when God showed up, he wasn't their idea of a conquering hero, so they had him executed in the most shameful way possible. Knowledge about God is not the same as knowing him. Paul is saying that whatever your background is, whatever your social standing, your beliefs, your education, your IQ, your skills, or your wit, whatever values you hold or things you admire, or strategies you live by, it doesn't matter. Whoever you are, the message of Jesus is going to be massively countercultural to you because it's not knowledge we're figuring out. It's a real person who longs to be with you. The message of the gospel is not a golden ticket to heaven when we die. It's not a self-help hack. It's not a bolt-on insurance policy. It's not joining a club. And there isn't an entrance exam. This deep secret of God, which was pretty much hidden for centuries, it has been revealed. But it's not written in the sky. It's not obvious. And sometimes it even looks a bit bonkers from the outside. But in verse 12, it says that it is freely given. So how do we receive these wonderful things? This letter of 1 Corinthians that we're in this term, it's from a man who thought he had plenty of wisdom. He went to one of the best schools, he had a brilliant mind, but with all his knowledge about God, he just didn't recognize God. And it took a Damascus Road experience, the Damascus Road experience, for him to realize it wasn't about his own wisdom, but about meeting with the person of Jesus. I've been reading a great book recently by Tom Wright called Paul, a Biography. And Tom Wright in this suggests that Jesus could have actually appeared to Paul as the chariot driver, which I thought was a fun thought. But however it happened, he met with the person of Jesus. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of Paul, you can read it in Acts, but the point is that he met with Jesus and then was massively changed by the Holy Spirit to become the person God would use to spread the gospel all over the empire. It was knowing God that brought about this change. Now, the Corinthians were big fans of wisdom, but there was a problem. They had taken the world's framework of wisdom and then tried to stuff and fit God into it, and they got themselves into a big mess. The church was deeply divided, and it had a mix of every type of wisdom from their own culture, which they were desperately trying to mix with God's wisdom. I think I can see where they're coming from a bit. About 7 years ago, I went on a one-man quest to find the truth. I was hurt and disillusioned with church. I experienced his abuse and pain. I was confident that it wasn't God who was the problem, but I was in a really knotted up mess. So I wanted to discover the actual truth. So I was chucking out everything I thought was slightly dodgy. Talked to Deb what it was like. Infuriated my nearest and dearest by reading and listening to anyone who was on the same quest to find the core truth about God. I searched the scriptures. I searched for others who were on the same journey. I ended up isolated and alone because, try as I might, I just couldn't find the solution. My heckles were always up for anything that was wonky, and finding wonkiness is very easy. I was like a self-appointed member of the doctrine police. Only I wasn't sure what was right, only what was wrong. Do you know what happened in the end? I got to the stage of just being done, broken with my quest, and fed up with fighting. I was sick of myself, and I was just honest enough to say to God, Lord, I'm at your feet, a sinner. I realise I don't have any good thing in me. I was like a cactus, spiny and prickly, and just clinging on to life in a dry and parched soil. I was trying to find knowledge about God without humbly coming to him, wanting to really know him. You see, my fruitless quest for finding the truth relied on me figuring it out. Paul is effectively saying in this letter that is an impossible task. And if I'd only got to this chapter and read it more closely, I might have saved myself a lot of grief. See, it's pretty easy to pick holes at someone when they're in the process of discovering God, because we're all works in progress. Some people think that they've got the truth figured out, but if we think along those lines, we're in great danger of becoming like one of the Corinthians. Do you remember what they were saying in chapter 1? Well, I think the same as Apollos, so I'm going to align myself with him. And there was even some extra sure ones. Oh, well, I think the same as Jesus, so I'm going to do it this way. Paul is basically warning the Corinthians that if you think you've got it all figured out, or you're sure that everyone else is wrong, then you're skating on very thin ice. Because it's not the truth, it's not us that finds the truth, but God that reveals the truth to us. Do you know what started my change from this prickly cactus to, one of those more tactile ones? shedding my spines and maybe growing a little budding flower and those wispy bits of cactus fluff, wherever it is, that you find yourself actually wanting to touch rather than being scared of touching a spine. What made all the difference was discovering Christians who weren't so concerned about knowledge that they had about God, but who actually knew God. And they offered me this Spirit-filled love. The Spirit had revealed Jesus to them, and they were just oozing his love. Their presence was something that had an effect on me. It was like they had direct access to God. Now, Romans 12:2 says this, well known. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. See, I used to think of this verse with just like the single occasion, when you first believed. But I'm realizing that it's for every day. How does God transform us? By changing the way we think. I was trying to stuff Jesus into my understanding, but I realized he has been transforming my whole world. I never imagined it could be like this. If we look at verse 9, Paul's quoting Isaiah, that prophet in the Old Testament, who had such an amazing foretaste of Jesus. What no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, is what God has prepared for those who love him. We see this in the Gospels all over the place. The most unlikely people meet with Jesus, and they're the ones who respond to him with their whole hearts. The centurion, Peter, Mary, the woman at the well, the woman with the perfume. These aren't the people who get everything figured out in their heads, but the ones who say an undivided yes to Jesus. They jump in deep and they realize that nothing else in all the world compares to this man. Now, verse 10 is interesting. Verse 10 is amazing because it's saying that the Spirit searches out everything and shows us God's deep secrets. Now, there's now, by the way, I've never studied Greek, but it doesn't matter because there is an app that you can look at all the Greek. So you can be just like me, unlearned, but you can see exactly what each writer was meaning. You can go and click on it. So that's what I've done with this. We get this Barphos. It's probably not pronounced like that. But this word Barphos means all those things at the bottom. It's an inexhaustible abundance that's beyond human experience. See, this is a little bit what discovering God is like. An inexhaustible abundance that's beyond human experience. See, this become my testimony. I was amazed that when my gaze was on Jesus, the Spirit revealed things to me. But it wasn't in the way that I expected. Whereas before, I had been trying to kind of ram the jigsaw pieces that didn't fit together. Now, this was different. The Spirit would flood me with his presence. And suddenly, I had a revelation of Jesus. In an instant, I discovered more than I ever dreamed of months of study. Oh, Lord, all the while, I've been so concerned with these little bits. And in an instant, you show me the glimpse of your perspective. Oh, wow. Yes, Lord. I see. It's an interesting word in this verse, and it reminds me of a time when I went snorkeling for the first time. Now, my dad had grown up in Malta, and because his dad was in the Navy. And I've lost my place. Now, my dad had always talked about how brilliant the swimming was around the island of Malta. And eventually in my late teens, after hearing all the stories, eventually went to see all his old haunts. Okay, so this is not me, but this is how I felt when I was there. A bit underwhelmed, getting used to using a snorkel, because obviously your nose is covered and you've got this thing that you're kind of worried that it's not going to reach the air. So I was enjoying the temperature of the water, but I kind of expected to see more things down there, and so I was kind of getting used to it. And there was one place where there was this underwater cliff. And so I tried to find a photo that was similar to what it was like. So suddenly we went from a few feet of water to not being able to even see the bottom. And then the fish were amazing. I kept going up to the surface, getting the biggest gulp of air possible, and then swimming down as far as I dared go. It was a whole different world. The plants, the fish, the colours, the serenity, the little bit scared feeling. When I was back with the others on the beach, I was trying to explain what it was like, but I couldn't really. I just said, come and see for yourself what it's like. This was the first time that I've been transported into this different world, and it blew my mind. See, this is a little bit like Paul is describing. Before I got into the deep, my thoughts of the underwater world were shaped by my experience on the land. On the land you walk, don't you? You're tied down with gravity. But underwater it's totally different. You can kind of fly or glide. You can go up and down with ease. See, the wisdom of the world is being clever, diligent, skillful, but the wisdom of God is actually knowing him. The wisdom of the world says that being an individual is important, but the wisdom of God says we can only function together in him. The reason why the message of Jesus is so countercultural to everyone is that it just doesn't fit with this world's framework. When I was there in Malta, no one forced me to put on that snorkel, but I heard from my dad that it was really good. So good, he would say. I could have stayed on the beach. I could have stayed in the shallows, been content with just gliding in a little bit of water. But I never would have seen the real wonder of what was there in the deep. Looking down at the water from the land, it was inviting, and I wanted to take a look inside. And I felt this tussle between wanting to be in the water, but at the same time being wary of it. This reminded me of the interaction between Jesus and Nicodemus in John 3. It was like this tussle between the two worlds. If you don't know the story, then look it up when you get home. But basically, Nicodemus is trying to squeeze Jesus into his idea of human tradition and all of the thinking of the Jews. And Jesus is talking about whole other worlds that doesn't make sense. It's like they're talking at cross purposes. All this talk about rebirth, water, wind and spirit is blowing poor old Nick's mind. He keeps asking questions, trying to figure it out, but he just doesn't want to take the plunge. Although if you skip to the end of the story, then you get a little glimpse, but I'll let you do that at home. God is beckoning all people everywhere to come in. He's saying, it's so good in his kingdom. Come and see. The water we're being invited into is the Spirit. He wants us to reveal the mysteries of God to us. The mystery of Christ has been revealed. It's been prepared for those who love him, freely given, so we can actually experience the mind of Christ. So my question to you tonight is, have you got into this water? Have you met this good God? Maybe like Nicodemus, it just doesn't seem to fit with the world as you know it. But you're torn because the water looks good and you're longing for something that really satisfies. Is this Jesus really the Saviour of the world? Maybe you've gone in ankle deep and you're just wary of going any further. You're looking back at all the people on the beach and you feel like you might be missing out on what they're doing. Is it really for me? Maybe you feel like you've been swimming about a bit, but you've been hurt on the rocks. You want to go in deeper, but there's pain that you can't ignore. The wisdom of the world says that you should give up, get out. but you've got this deep longing in your soul. You know you're never going to be satisfied on that beach. Maybe you've experienced the wonder of God in the past, but then you panicked and you went up to the surface and you feel like you've been treading water, unable to get past a certain issue. Wherever you are on this journey, we need to be constantly reminded that the mystery of God is revealed through the cross of Christ. The Spirit reveals the wonder of this risen Saviour. We don't have to strive to figure it out. We just have to have our gaze on him. When we see him and his glory, everything changes. The Spirit reveals Christ and we see everything differently. Problems become opportunities. One-upmanship becomes preferring others. Anxiety becomes joy. The complicated becomes strangely simple. The knotted up becomes straightened out. Problems and trouble don't go away, but we get a totally different perspective. What's hindering you from getting into the bathos, from going in deep with the Spirit? Nicodemus wasn't the only one who was trying to fit the wisdom of God into the world's wisdom. Apollos, the one who eventually came to Corinth and pastored the church, was doing the same. We read in Acts about a time when he met Priscilla and Aquila. This is Acts 18. Apollos had been taught the way of the Lord, and he taught others about Jesus with an enthusiastic spirit and with accuracy. However, he only knew about John's baptism. When Priscilla and Aquila heard him preaching boldly in the synagogue, they took him aside and explained the way of God even more accurately. You see, Apollos was an amazing guy. He was extremely gifted at speaking, trained in rhetoric. He studied at the great university in Alexandria, but he knew about God rather than knowing God. So what did Priscilla and Aquila say to him, I wonder? Priscilla and Aquila had worked alongside Paul for a long while. They were fluent in all the things that Paul was saying. How did that conversation go, I wonder? How did the extremely clever and articulate Apollos react to the explanation of the baptism in the Spirit by a couple of tent makers? Wonder how it went. How would I have reacted to being told there was something I was missing? Would I be defensive or would I embrace this message? Well, happily, Apollos did embrace the message and he dived in deep. Many people think that it was him who went on to write the book of Hebrews. Maybe it's this experience he was thinking about when in Hebrews 3 he says, "Today, when you hear God's voice, don't harden your heart." Be soft-hearted to a message that is different to the world's wisdom. As Paul tells the Corinthians, this isn't an individual quest. The Spirit leads us to all dive in together. No one's going to last long swimming off alone. You need your brothers and your sisters all around you. We need to be encouraging each other to come in deeper. We need to be beckoning to people on the beach, like we heard first up. Come, join us. For those who are wary or are hurt, we need to be kind and gentle, showing them the same sort of grace that we was shown when we was in that prickly state, being a cactus. See, we have a Saviour who loves us. He loves everyone, and he longs for us to experience his changing presence. That presence is his Spirit. He is the one who reveals this deep mystery of God. He's in us, revealing to us the very mind of Christ. And this is a scandalous, it's crazy message. The God of the universe beckons us into. Dive deep into my love. Respond to him. It's his Spirit who enables us to see. We see that stuff that we once thought was totally foolish, we start to see it actually it's the wisdom of God. This, my friends, is spirit-filled wisdom. And a healthy church is one that has living, spirit-filled wisdom. In verse 16, Paul quotes from Isaiah 40 when he's posing a kind of impossible question. Who can know the Lord's thoughts, he says. But then he declares this most scandalous message of all, that it's through the Spirit that we can actually know the mind of Christ. See, this is what getting into the bathos is all about. As we dive down into all this beauty of the wisdom of Christ, Christ revealed to us. This is what real transformation is all about. When we're in deep, our whole way of thinking is transformed. We realise that all the stuff we were so concerned about on the beach paling into insignificance. Nothing compares, nothing satisfies like going in deeper with God. The presence of God is his Spirit. The Spirit is a person. He's the one who's whispering truth and love. He's the one who delights to see you grow and flourish as a child of God. He's longing to help you be healed from your pain and your trauma. He's longing for you to feel whole. He wants you to experience the reality of eternity, but right now. He wants you to fix your eyes on our Saviour Jesus, to have your gaze always on the one who saves. He wants you to take off your heavy burden that you've been carrying for so long, like what Kathy told us about, and know the deep joy of him in your heart. He takes you by the hand and leads you into this deep water of his presence. He's so kind and he's gentle. He's reassuring when you're unsure. Just trust him. He wants to show you more. And it's another world to experience. But you have to get into the bathos, into the deep. So we're going to have a time of praying with each other, briefly. And Pete's going to lead us. I'd just like you to think, what prevents you from going in deeper with God? What is the thing that is stopping you from going in deeper with him?
Great. Thanks, Rob. So that's that that question. What prevents me from going in deeper with God? And we'll all be at different places. I love that analogy of the deep sea dive. And maybe you're on the beach, actually. Maybe you've never taken the plunge. Maybe you don't yet know Jesus. And if that's you, we'd particularly love to chat with you and pray with you if you would like to take that plunge and know him. But all of us, I think, sometimes retreat or sometimes get distracted or sometimes want to be pulled back on the beach by things going on. Actually, the beauty, it's like when you watch those David Attenboroughs, isn't it, of like the beauty of what's going on under the ocean, like the beauty of what God's called us to. So I am aware of time, but what I think we should do is if you're not in a rush, then why not just for a moment, just reflect on that question of what prevents me from going deeper with God, and just perhaps turn in a 2 or 3 and pray for one another. So just say, just if you're feeling open, just share, do you know what, I think this prevents me from going further with God. and I won't pull the meeting back in together. So we'll sort of officially finish there. But why not take a few moments to think, to reflect on that question, and just pray for one another of actually, I want to lay that down. It really ties into what we were saying in the worship. I want to lay that down. I want to lay that anxiety down that's preventing me, even some of the testimony that came through, actually that the things that can prevent me from going deeper with God. So why not lay that down? Why not pray for one another? If you've got a dash, that's absolutely not a problem. And we'll see you all some point in the week or next week. So thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, go from there. Thank you guys.